The winter of 1814 descended upon Santa Fe like a whispered promise, soft, deceptive, beautiful in its cruelty. Snow fell in delicate spirals through the crisp December air, dusting the adobe walls and wooden beams of the territorial capital, with a frosting of white that made everything look pristine, untouched, new. But Adeline Moore knew better than to trust beautiful things. She stood at the tall window of her bedroom in the governor's residence, her fingers pressed against the cold glass, watching the plaza below transform into something from a dream. Lanterns had been strung between the buildings, their golden light creating halos in the falling snow. Musicians were already gathering near the central gazebo, their instruments gleaming. Tonight was the Winter Ball, the social event of the season, a display of civilization in what the Eastern newspapers still called the savage frontier. "Miss Adeline, your mother is asking for you." The voice of Maria, her maid, cut through her reverie. Adeline turned from the window, smoothing the pale blue morning dress she wore. "Tell her I'll be down shortly." But Maria lingered in the doorway, her dark eyes knowing. The older woman had been with the Moore family since they'd arrived in Santa Fe 3 years ago, and she'd watched Adeline transform from a quiet, haunted girl into the poised young woman everyone now admired. "You've been staring out that window for an hour, Nina. What do you see out there?" "Everything I'm trying to forget," Adeline thought, but she smiled instead, the practiced, perfect smile she'd mastered. "Just the snow." "It's lovely, isn't it?" Maria made a soft sound that might have been agreement or skepticism. "Your mother has invited Captain Bradley to escort you tonight. She says he's quite taken with you." Captain William Bradley. Handsome, well-connected, safely predictable. The kind of man her mother had been parading before her since they'd arrived in this territory. The kind of man who would never ask uncomfortable questions about the year Adeline had spent away from Boston, the year her family never spoke of, the year that had changed everything. "How wonderful," Adeline said, her voice flat. After Maria left, Adeline returned to the window. The snow was falling heavier now, and she pressed her forehead against the glass, letting the cold seep into her skin. 4 years. It had been 4 years since that summer, since the wagon train, since the attack that had scattered their group across the New Mexico desert, since she'd found herself alone and terrified in a landscape that seemed designed to kill anything soft, since him. She closed her eyes, and there he was, as vivid as if no time had passed at all. Sahkyo. Even his name felt dangerous in her mind, a secret she'd learned to bury so deep that sometimes she could almost convince herself he'd been a dream. A tall, powerful figure moving through the harsh terrain like he was part of it, all lean muscle and watchful intelligence. Eyes the color of dark amber that had looked at her with suspicion, then curiosity, then something that made her heart race even now. The Apache warrior who had saved her life, who had taught her to survive, who had looked at her one evening as the sun painted the desert gold and said, "You see beauty where others see only death. That is a rare thing." Who had touched her face with such gentleness that she'd forgotten they were supposed to be enemies. Who had loved her, truly, completely, impossibly loved her, for 3 months that felt like a lifetime, and who she'd left behind when her father's rescue party finally found her, because she'd been too afraid, too young, too convinced that their love couldn't survive in the real world. Adeline opened her eyes, her breath fogging the glass. She'd thought time would erase him, that the elegant life her mother had built for her in Santa Fe, the dinners, the dances, the endless parade of suitable men would eventually paint over those memories until they faded to nothing. But 4 years later, she still woke sometimes with the phantom sensation of desert wind on her skin, still heard his voice in quiet moments, still felt the ghost of his hands in her hair. "Shi ni Johnny," he'd called her once, "my beautiful one." She'd learned enough of his language to understand, and the words had felt like a brand on her heart. "Miss Adeline," her mother's voice drifted up the stairs, sharp with impatience. "We have much to prepare." Adeline straightened, pulling herself together with practiced efficiency. She was Mrs. Catherine Moore's daughter now, poised, proper, perfectly civilized. The girl who'd loved an Apache warrior in the desert had been a temporary madness, an aberration born of fear and isolation. That's what she'd told herself 1,000 times. Tonight she would dance with Captain Bradley. She would smile and be charming. She would be exactly what everyone expected. And she would not think about amber eyes and calloused hands and a voice that had made her name sound like poetry. The snow fell heavier as evening approached, transforming Santa Fe into something ethereal. Sahkyo watched from the shadows at the edge of the plaza, his body still as stone, his eyes tracking every movement in the growing celebration below. He shouldn't be here. Every instinct screamed at him to turn away, to disappear back into the mountains where he belonged, where the world made sense and followed rules he understood. But he'd heard the rumors, whispers carried by traders and travelers, that the Moore family had settled in Santa Fe, that the daughter, the beautiful one, was the jewel of territorial society, and he'd told himself he just needed to see, to confirm that she was alive, safe, happy. Then he could finally close that chapter, finally stop waking in the night reaching for someone who wasn't there. 3 months, that's all they'd had together. 3 months in the summer of 1810, when she'd stumbled into his path, filthy, exhausted, terrified, after her wagon train had been attacked by raiders. He'd been tracking the same group, and when he'd found her hiding among the rocks, half dead from thirst and exposure, his first instinct had been to leave her. White settlers meant trouble, meant soldiers, meant death for his people. But she'd looked up at him with those green eyes, the color of new grass after rain, and something in his chest had shifted. He'd meant to take her to the nearest settlement, a day's journey, maybe 2. But the territory was crawling with Comanche raiders that summer, and the path was dangerous. So a day became 3, became a week, and somewhere in that time, she'd stopped being the white girl and become Adeline. She'd been 17, soft-handed and educated, completely unprepared for the harshness of the desert. But she'd been brave too, braver than she knew. She'd learned without complaining, how to find water, how to move silently, how to read the land. And at night, when they'd sat by small fires that barely pushed back the darkness, she'd talk to him, not at him, like so many whites did, but to him, like he was human. "Tell me about your people," she'd asked one evening, her voice soft. And he had. Things he'd never shared with outsiders. About his mother, who'd taught him to track by watching the way spiders built their webs. About his younger sister, who died of the coughing sickness brought by soldiers. About the land that was being taken piece by piece, and how it felt to watch his world shrink. She'd listened like his words mattered. And then she'd shared her own stories, about a mother who saw her as a trophy to be displayed, a father who was never satisfied, a life in Boston that had felt like a beautiful cage. "Sometimes," she'd whispered, "I think I was meant to be lost, so I could find out who I really am." Somewhere in those conversations, in the quiet intimacy of survival, they'd crossed a line neither had intended, a touch that lasted too long, eyes that held too much meaning. And then one night, under stars so thick they looked like diamonds scattered on black silk, he'd reached for her, and she'd come to him without hesitation. What followed had been inevitable, overwhelming, terrifying in its intensity. They'd made love like people who knew their time was limited, like they were trying to memorize each other through touch alone. And when she'd curled against his chest afterward, her fingers tracing the scars on his skin, he'd known with absolute certainty that he would never feel this way about anyone else. "I love you," she'd said simply, no hesitation, no fear. "I know I shouldn't. I know it's impossible, but I do." "Ayo anoshni," he'd replied. "I love you beyond words." And he'd meant it with every fiber of his being. For 3 months they'd existed in a bubble outside reality. He'd taken her to hidden places, a canyon where wildflowers grew in impossible abundance, a spring-fed pool so clear you could see every stone at the bottom, a mesa where you could see for 100 miles in every direction. They'd talked and laughed and loved with the desperate intensity of people who knew it couldn't last. But it couldn't last. When her father's rescue party had finally found their trail, Adeline had looked at him with tears streaming down her face. "Come with me," she'd begged. "We'll find a way. We'll make them understand." But he'd known better. He'd seen what happened to his people who trusted white promises. And more than that, he'd seen the fear in her eyes. Not of him, but of what loving him would cost her. The life she'd lose, the family who would disown her, the world that would never accept them. "Go," he'd told her, his heart breaking with every word. "Go back to your people, find a good man, be safe." "I'll never forget you," she'd sobbed. "Never. "I swear it. Forget me," he'd said, forcing the words out. "This was a dream. Now wake up." He'd disappeared into the desert before the rescue party could see him, carrying the sound of her crying like a wound that would never heal. And he'd told himself it was better this way, cleaner. She would recover, would forget, would build a life that made sense. He'd believed that for 4 years, until tonight, when the whispers had drawn him here, to this plaza draped in snow and lantern light. He'd told himself he just needed to see her once, to confirm she was happy. Then he could let her go for real. The music started, violins and guitars weaving together in a waltz. People began to gather in the plaza's center, couples forming for the first dance of the evening. Sahkyo scanned the crowd, looking for her, dreading finding her, unable to stop himself. And then he saw her. She emerged from the governor's residence like something from another world, a vision in white silk that caught the lamplight and turned it to gold. Her blonde hair was pinned up in an elaborate style he didn't understand, adorned with small white flowers. She wore gloves that reached her elbows and a necklace of pearls at her throat. She looked like everything he wasn't, everything he could never be. She looked like she'd forgotten him completely. A man in a military uniform, tall, dark-haired, confident, took her hand and led her toward the dancing area. She smiled at him, that perfect, practiced smile, and let him guide her into position. The music swelled, and they began to move together, graceful and proper and completely at ease in this world of civilization and order. Sahkyo felt something crack inside his chest. This was what he'd wanted, wasn't it? For her to be safe, cared for, integrated into a life that could give her everything he couldn't. So why did watching her smile at another man feel like dying? He should leave, disappear back into the darkness, like he'd never been here. Let this be the final proof that she'd moved on, that their time together had been just a beautiful aberration for her too. But then something changed. The dance ended, and the military man tried to guide Adeline toward the refreshment tables. But she pulled away, shaking her head, her smile faltering for just a moment. The man looked confused, tried to insist, but she'd already turned away, moving toward the edge of the dancing area. More couples were forming for the next dance. The music started again, something slower, more wistful. And Adeline, instead of returning to her escort, stood alone at the edge of the plaza, her face tilted up to the falling snow. Sahkyo watched, frozen, as something shifted in her expression. The careful mask fell away, replaced by something raw and real. She closed her eyes, and even from this distance he could see the tension leave her shoulders. And then she began to move. Not the formal, structured movements of the ballroom dances. This was something else entirely, instinctive, natural, like her body had its own memory of freedom. She turned slowly, arms outstretched, her white dress swirling around her like foam on water. The snow caught in her hair, on her shoulders, and she spun again, faster, lost in her own world. She looked exactly as she had 4 years ago, wild and beautiful and completely free, dancing in a desert sunset like the world was hers alone. And in that moment, Sahkyo knew with devastating clarity that she hadn't forgotten any more than he had. The realization hit him like a physical blow. 4 years of telling himself she'd moved on, that she'd found happiness in her civilized world. 4 years of trying to bury what he'd felt. And here she was, dancing alone in the snow like she was trying to shake off the weight of everything that bound her. Her face transformed with a grief and longing that matched his own. She remembers. The music swelled. Adeline spun again, her movements growing more desperate, more free, and then she opened her eyes and looked directly at him. Time stopped. Across the plaza, through the falling snow and dancing couples and celebration that surrounded them, their eyes met. And in that instant, 4 years of separation collapsed into nothing. Sahkyo saw her face transform, shock, disbelief, joy, terror, all flashing across her features in rapid succession. Her hand flew to her throat. Her lips parted, forming his name though no sound emerged. The blood drained from her face, then returned in a rush that colored her cheeks. She took a step toward him, unconscious, automatic, then stopped, her whole body trembling like a leaf in a storm. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe, could only stand there watching her see him, watching her break apart and come together again in the space of a heartbeat. You didn't forget, he thought, the knowledge both devastating and exhilarating. You didn't forget either. Around them the celebration continued, oblivious. People danced and laughed and talked, wrapped in their own small dramas. But in the space between Sahkyo and Adeline, the world had narrowed to just the two of them. Two people who'd spent 4 years trying to bury something that refused to die. The snow fell heavier, each flake catching the lamplight like small stars. And across the plaza, Adeline stood frozen in her white dress, staring at the ghost of her past made flesh, her carefully constructed world cracking apart with every beat of her racing heart. Adeline couldn't breathe. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. She was imagining him, conjuring him from memory and longing and the dangerous freedom she'd felt in those few moments of dancing alone. Because Sahkyo couldn't be here in Santa Fe at this ball, watching her with those eyes that still haunted her dreams. But he was. Tall and powerful and utterly motionless at the edge of the plaza, half hidden in shadow but unmistakably, devastatingly him. He wore simple clothes, dark pants, a shirt, a leather vest, nothing that would draw attention in a crowd, but to her he might as well have been the only person in the plaza. Every detail seared itself into her vision. The proud set of his shoulders, the sharp lines of his face, the way he stood like he was carved from the same stone as the mountains that ringed the city. 4 years. 4 years of telling herself she'd made the right choice, that loving him had been a temporary madness born of fear and isolation. 4 years of letting her mother dress her up and parade her before suitable men, of smiling until her face hurt, of building a life that looked perfect from the outside. 4 years of lying to herself, because the moment their eyes met, every carefully constructed wall she'd built came crashing down. Her heart slammed against her ribs so hard she thought they might break. Her blood turned to fire in her veins. Every nerve in her body suddenly screamed him, like he was magnetic north and she was a compass that had been pointing the wrong direction for years. She took a step toward him before conscious thought caught up. Her body knew what her mind had been denying, that she would walk through fire to reach him, that 4 years and all the rules of society meant nothing against the pull between them. "Miss Moore," Captain Bradley's voice cut through her trance like a knife. "Are you quite well? You look pale." Adeline tore her gaze away from Sahkyo with physical effort. The captain stood beside her, his handsome face creased with concern, completely unaware that her entire world had just been upended. Yes, I'm sorry. The cold, I think. I felt dizzy for a moment." "Let me get you some wine." He was already reaching for her arm, solicitous and proper. "No." The word came out sharper than she intended. She softened it with a weak smile. I think I need some air. Some private air, if you'll excuse me." Before he could protest, she gathered her skirts and moved toward the edge of the plaza, her heart pounding so hard she thought everyone must hear it. She couldn't look back at where Sahkyo had been standing, couldn't risk giving them away. But every instinct screamed at her to run to him, to confirm he was real, to... What? What could they possibly say to each other after 4 years, after she'd chosen her family over him, after she'd let him walk away believing she'd forget him? But her feet kept moving, carrying her away from the music and lights toward the narrow alley between 2 adobe buildings where the shadows were thick and private. She was shaking. From cold or shock or the overwhelming rush of emotion, she couldn't tell. Her breath came in short gasps that fogged in the frigid air. She pressed herself against the wall, her gloved hand over her racing heart, trying to think. He was here. He was alive. He'd seen her. And the way he'd looked at her, like she was water, and he'd been dying of thirst, told her everything she needed to know about whether he'd forgotten. Footsteps crunched in the snow behind her. Adeline spun around, and there he was. Up close, he was both exactly as she remembered and heartbreakingly different. The same proud face, the same intense eyes, the same presence that made the air feel charged. But there were new lines around his eyes, a harder set to his jaw, a wariness that hadn't been there before. He looked like a man who'd been through battles she couldn't imagine. They stared at each other in silence, the snow falling softly around them, the music from the plaza a distant dream. Adeline's mouth opened, closed. She had 1,000 things she wanted to say, but none of them would come. Finally, Sahkyo spoke, his voice low and rough, as if he hadn't used it in days. "You dance like you're still free." The words hit her like a blow. She let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. I haven't been free since—" She couldn't finish. "Since I left you. Since I chose safety over love. Since I made the biggest mistake of my life." He took a step closer, and she could smell him. Leather and sage and something wild that made her dizzy with memory. "You look—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "You look like you belong here." "I don't." The words burst out before she could stop them. "I don't belong anywhere. I haven't belonged anywhere since—" "Don't!" His voice cracked like a whip. "Don't say it. Don't make this harder." "Harder than what?" Tears burned her eyes. "Harder than spending 4 years trying to forget you? Harder than smiling at men who bore me senseless, while remembering how it felt to laugh with you? Harder than waking up every morning in a soft bed, wishing I was sleeping on hard ground with your arms around me?" Sahkyo's face contorted with something that might have been pain or fury or desperate hope. "You chose this. You chose to leave. I was scared." The words exploded out of her. "I was 17 and terrified, and I thought it was impossible. I thought I was protecting both of us. And now?" His eyes bored into hers. "Are you still scared?" Adeline looked at him, really looked at him, at the man who'd taught her what it meant to be truly seen, truly known. The man who'd held her through nightmares and made her laugh in the middle of a desert and loved her with an intensity that had ruined her for anyone else. "Terrified," she whispered. "But not of the same things." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, his fingers touched her cheek with such gentleness that she nearly collapsed. His thumb brushed away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "Shi ni joni," he murmured, the Apache words a caress. "I tried to forget you. I tried for 4 years. But you're in every sunrise I see, every wind I feel. You're the ghost I can't outrun." "Then stop running." Adeline covered his hand with hers, pressing it against her face. "Please, I can't do this anymore. I can't pretend you don't exist. I can't marry some proper man and live a proper life when my heart has been yours since the moment you looked at me like I was worth saving. Adeline." Her name on his lips was a prayer and a curse. "Your world and mine, they don't touch. You know that. They're touching right now." She stepped closer, until they were almost pressed together, propriety be damned. "They touched for 3 months 4 years ago. They can touch again. And then what?" But his other hand had found her waist, fingers splaying across the white silk as if he couldn't help himself. "You go back to your ballroom and I disappear into the mountains. We steal moments in shadows while you smile at your captain and I watch from darkness. I don't know." She was crying openly now, not caring about the tears that ruined her carefully applied cosmetics. "I don't have answers. All I know is that seeing you tonight, it feels like I've been holding my breath for 4 years, and I can finally breathe again." Sahkyo pulled her against him, and Adeline buried her face in his chest, inhaling the scent of him, feeling the solid reality of his body against hers. His arms came around her, strong and sure, and for the first time in 4 years, she felt like she'd come home. "I never stopped loving you," he said into her hair. "Not for a single day. But Adeline, love isn't always enough. You know that." She pulled back just enough to look up at him, her hands fisting in his shirt. "Then we make it enough. We figure it out, together. Please, Sahkyo, don't walk away from me again. I won't survive it twice." He looked down at her, and she saw the war in his eyes, desire and duty, hope and fear, love and the terrible knowledge of how much they stood to lose. The snow fell around them, muffling the world, creating a cocoon of white silence where only they existed. "Miss Moore!" Her mother's voice cut through the night like a blade. "Adeline, where are you?" They sprang apart, but the damage was done. Adeline's face was tear-stained, her hair disheveled, her dress marked where Sahkyo's hands had gripped her. She looked exactly like a woman who'd been in a passionate embrace, and there was no hiding it. Sahkyo's hand found hers in the darkness, squeezed once. "Meet me," he breathed. "Tomorrow. The old mission ruins north of town. Dawn." "I'll be there," she promised. And then he was gone, melting into the shadows like he'd never been there at all. Adeline took a shaky breath, pressed her hands to her burning cheeks, and tried to compose herself. But as she emerged from the alley to face her mother's sharp eyes and inevitable questions, one thought rang through her mind with absolute clarity. She was done running, done pretending, done trying to be someone she wasn't. Whatever came next, scandal, exile, heartbreak, or salvation, she would face it. But she would face it with him. The snow continued to fall, soft and persistent, covering the ground in white. And somewhere in the darkness, Sahkyo stood watching the light from the plaza, his heart pounding with something that felt terrifyingly like hope. Dawn came cold and grey, the sky the color of old pewter. Adeline stood at her bedroom window, already dressed in her riding habit, a practical dark green wool that her mother hated because it wasn't fashionable enough. But fashion was the last thing on her mind as she watched the eastern horizon begin to pale. She hadn't slept. How could she? The confrontation with her mother had been brutal but brief. Adeline Moore had known immediately that something was wrong, had seen it in her daughter's tear-stained face and shaking hands. But Adeline had claimed illness, exhaustion, feminine trouble, anything to avoid the truth. And her mother, perhaps sensing that pressing too hard might shatter something, had let it go, for now. But Captain Bradley had been another matter. He'd sought her out before leaving, his handsome face creased with concern. "I hope I didn't offend you somehow, Miss Moore. If I was too forward—" "No," she'd assured him, forcing a smile that felt like it might crack her face. "You were perfectly gentlemanly. I simply wasn't feeling well." He'd accepted this, but his eyes had been troubled. "Perhaps I might call on you tomorrow, to ensure you've recovered." She'd made vague promises, knowing she wouldn't be there, knowing that by tomorrow everything might be different. Now, as the sky lightened incrementally, Adeline moved with quiet efficiency. She braided her hair in a simple plait, pulled on her warmest cloak, and slipped her feet into sturdy boots. The house was silent, servants not yet stirring, her parents still asleep. She moved like a ghost through the hallways, every creaking floorboard making her heart jump. The stables were dark and cold. Her mare, Duchess, nickered softly in greeting. Adeline saddled her quickly, her fingers remembering the motions Sahkyo had taught her years ago. Always check the girth twice. A loose saddle can kill you as surely as any enemy. The thought of him made her hands shake. Was she really doing this? Sneaking out to meet him, risking her reputation, her family's standing, her entire future for a few stolen hours? Yes. Yes, she was. Because the alternative, going back to the half-life she'd been living, the endless charade of pretending she was someone she wasn't, was no longer survivable. She led Duchess out of the stable, mounted, and set off toward the old mission ruins as the first rays of sun broke over the mountains. Sahkyo had been waiting since before dawn, his body tense with an anxiety he refused to name. She wouldn't come. Why would she? In the harsh light of morning, the madness of last night would seem like exactly that. Madness. She'd remember her comfortable life, her family's expectations, the impossibility of what they were considering. She'd stay in her soft bed, safe behind adobe walls, and he would learn once again that some bridges couldn't be crossed twice. But even as he told himself this, he couldn't leave. Couldn't stop watching the road that led north from Santa Fe, scanning for any sign of movement. The mission ruins were a favorite subject for painters and romantics. Crumbling adobe walls overtaken by scrub brush, a bell tower that listed dangerously to one side, remnants of what had once been a thriving outpost of Spanish civilization. To Sahkyo, it represented something else. The arrogance of empires, the foolishness of thinking you could tame land that had never asked to be tamed. He'd spent the night in a painful state between hope and despair, replaying every moment of their encounter. The shock on her face when she'd seen him, the tears that had streamed down her cheeks, the way she'd trembled when he touched her, like his hands carried an electric charge. The desperate certainty in her voice when she'd said, "I'll be there." But he'd also seen her in that white dress, dancing with her captain, looking like she belonged in a world he would never be part of. Seen the pearls at her throat, and the flowers in her hair, and the elegant way she moved through that crowd of civilized people. What could he offer her that compared to that? A life on the run, always looking over their shoulders? Poverty and hardship, and the constant threat of violence? Movement on the road snapped him from his thoughts. A single rider, moving at a careful canter, dark green against the pale morning light. Sahkyo's heart stuttered in his chest. She came. He stepped out from behind the ruins as Adeline rode into the clearing. She saw him and immediately dismounted. Her movements fluid despite the formal riding habit, For a moment they just stared at each other in the cold morning light, as if confirming that last night had been real and not some fevered dream. Then Adeline crossed the distance between them in a rush, and suddenly she was in his arms and he was lifting her off her feet, and they were holding each other like drowning people who'd finally found solid ground. "You came," Sahkyo breathed into her hair. "I didn't think—" "Of course I came." Adeline pulled back just enough to look at him, her green eyes fierce. "Did you really think I wouldn't?" "I thought—" He touched her face, needing to confirm she was real. "I thought morning would bring clarity, that you'd remember all the reasons we can't do this." "I remember all the reasons." Her gloved hands framed his face. "I just don't care about them anymore. I've spent 4 years being reasonable, being proper, doing what everyone expects. And I've been miserable every single day." Sahkyo's thumb traced her lower lip, and he felt her shiver. "Your mother will fight this. Your father will be furious. You could lose everything. I already lost everything that mattered." Her eyes glistened with tears. "When I left you 4 years ago, I lost the only thing I actually needed. Everything else is just decoration." He wanted to kiss her so badly it hurt. But there were things that needed to be said first, hard truths that couldn't be avoided. "Adeline, listen to me. You need to understand what this means. If we do this, if we truly do this, there's no going back. Your family will likely disown you. Society will shun you, and my people—" He stopped, the words catching in his throat. "Your people what?" she asked softly. "My people are few, scattered, hunted." The words were bitter on his tongue. "The life I can offer you is nothing like what you're used to. We'd have to leave this territory. Go west maybe, or north into the mountains. We'd be alone, always moving, never truly safe. You'd be giving up comfort, security, everything you've known." "I lived 3 months with you in the desert," Adeline reminded him. "I know what that life looks like, and I also know that I was happier sleeping on the ground next to you than I've been in any featherbed since. You were young then. It was an adventure. This would be forever." "Good." She kissed him then, soft and sure. "Forever is exactly what I want." Sahkyo groaned, his control fracturing. He kissed her back with 4 years of longing, his hands tangling in her braid, pulling her against him until there was no space between them. She tasted like snow and tears and coming home, and he'd forgotten how perfectly she fit against him, how her sighs sounded like music. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, the sun had fully risen, painting the ruins in shades of gold and pink. "We need a plan," Sahkyo said, his forehead pressed against hers. "We can't just run blindly. Your father will send men after you. And there are soldiers who know my face, bounty hunters who'd turn me in without hesitation." Adeline nodded, her practical side reasserting itself. "My parents are hosting a dinner party in 3 days. The house will be full of guests. They won't notice if I slip away during the chaos. I can pack what I need, take some money from my personal account." "No." Sahkyo's voice was firm. "You take nothing that can be traced, nothing that can give them leverage to find us or force you back. Clothes, yes. Money from your account, no, they'll track that." "Then how—" "I have money. Not much, but enough to get us north. I've been saving, trading." He didn't mention what he'd been saving for, the vague, impossible dream that somehow, someday, he might see her again, that he'd need to be ready if that miracle occurred. Adeline's expression softened, like she understood what he wasn't saying. 3 days. I can manage 3 more days of pretending. Can you?" He searched her face. "Once you walk into that house again, everything will pull you to stay. Your mother will work on you. That captain will press his suit. It would be easy to convince yourself this is crazy, that we're making a terrible mistake. I won't change my mind." Her voice was steel wrapped in silk. "I wasted 4 years, Sahkyo. I'm not wasting another day. 3 days. That's all the time I need to say goodbye to the life I'm supposed to want. And then I'm yours. If you'll have me." "If I'll have you?" He laughed, the sound rough and disbelieving. "Adeline, you're all I've thought about for 4 years. You're in every breath I take. Having you isn't the question. Keeping you safe, keeping you happy, that's what terrifies me." She took his face in both hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. "Then be terrified with me. We'll figure it out together. That's what love is, isn't it? Being brave enough to be scared together?" He kissed her again, slower this time, trying to memorize every detail. The way her lips parted for him, the small sound she made in the back of her throat, the way her fingers curled into his shirt like she was afraid he might disappear. When they finally pulled apart, the sun was well above the horizon. Adeline would need to return before she was missed. 3 days, she said again, mounting Duchess. Where should I meet you? Here, Dawn, pack light, we'll need to move fast. He caught her hand before she could ride away. Adeline, are you sure? Truly sure? Because once we do this, there's no undoing it. She looked down at him, and her smile was the first genuine one he'd seen since she'd appeared at that ball. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. I'll see you in 3 days, my heart. She rode away, and Sahkyo watched until she was out of sight, his chest tight with a dangerous mixture of hope and fear. 3 days. 3 days to prepare, to make sure he had everything they'd need. 3 days to steel himself for what was coming, because he had no illusions about what would happen when her family realized she was gone. But as he turned back toward his camp in the foothills, one thought rang clear through all the worry. She was choosing him. After 4 years, after all the reasons to stay apart, she was choosing him, and he would spend the rest of his life making sure she never regretted it. The 3 days that followed were the longest of Adeline's life. She returned from the mission ruins to find her mother already awake and waiting, her face tight with suspicion. An early morning ride? How unusual for you, Adeline. I couldn't sleep, Adeline lied smoothly, peeling off her gloves. The fresh air helped. Catherine Moore's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing. Instead, she launched into a recitation of the day's schedule, dress fittings, social calls, preparations for the upcoming dinner party. Adeline nodded along, playing her role perfectly, while her mind raced with plans. Captain Bradley called that afternoon, as promised. Adeline received him in the parlor, painfully aware of her mother hovering nearby like a hawk. He was charming, attentive, everything a suitable match should be, and she felt absolutely nothing. I was hoping you might allow me to escort you to the Christmas Eve service, he said, his dark eyes warm with obvious affection. It would be an honor. That's very kind, Adeline murmured, not committing. I find myself quite taken with you, Miss Moore. He reached for her hand, and she had to force herself not to pull away. I know we haven't known each other long, but I believe, that is, I hope, that you might feel some regard for me as well. This was it. The moment to be cruel, to be kind, to make the break clean. But her mother was watching, and creating a scene now would only make things harder. So Adeline smiled weakly and said, You're very kind, Captain. Perhaps we might discuss this after the holidays. It was cowardly, she knew, but it bought her time. That evening, alone in her room, she began to carefully sort through her belongings. What could she take? What would she need? The practical items were easy. Warm clothes, sturdy boots, a good cloak. But then there were the personal things, the items that carried memory and meaning. Her mother's locket, a book of poetry her father had given her, the small sketchbook where she'd tried to draw the desert landscapes she'd seen with Sahkyo. In the end, she decided on a single small bag. Anything more would be noticed. She hid it in the back of her wardrobe, adding items gradually so the servants wouldn't see a sudden absence of belongings. The dinner party loomed. Her mother was in her element, orchestrating everything with military precision. The menu was discussed endlessly. The seating arrangements were debated, and through it all Catherine Moore watched her daughter with an intensity that made Adeline's skin prickle. You've been different since the ball, her mother observed on the second evening as they reviewed the guest list. Distracted, are you feeling well? Perfectly well, mother. Captain Bradley is quite smitten with you. Catherine's voice was carefully neutral. Your father and I believe he would make an excellent match. His family connections are impeccable, and he's bound for a distinguished career. I'm sure he is. Adeline. Her mother's hand covered hers, and for a moment there was something almost vulnerable in her expression. I know you think me harsh, controlling, but everything I do is to ensure your future, your security. You're 21 years old now. It's time to think seriously about marriage. Guilt twisted in Adeline's stomach. Her mother wasn't a villain, just a woman shaped by her own limitations, her own fears about what the world demanded of women. But that didn't change what Adeline had to do. I know, mother, she said softly. I promise I'm thinking very seriously about my future. More seriously than you could possibly imagine, she thought. The third day dawned clear and cold. The dinner party was that evening, a grand affair with 24 guests, multiple courses, music and dancing. The perfect opportunity to slip away. Adeline moved through the day in a daze of nervous energy. She helped with preparations, smiled at arriving guests, put on the dress her mother had chosen, deep blue silk that brought out her eyes. She let Maria dress her hair, apply cosmetics, drape pearls around her neck. She looked in the mirror and saw a beautiful stranger. "You look lovely, Nina," Maria said softly. But there was something knowing in the older woman's eyes, something that made Adeline wonder how much she suspected. The party began at sunset, the house filled with laughter and conversation, the scent of roasted meat and spiced wine. Adeline played her role perfectly. Gracious hostess, charming conversationalist, dutiful daughter. Captain Bradley was there, of course, attentive as always. Her father looked pleased, already counting the advantages of such a match. As the evening wore on, Adeline felt time slowing down, each moment stretching into eternity. This was her last night in this house. Her last night as Catherine and Robert Moore's daughter. Her last night in the civilized world. She found herself studying faces, memorizing details, her mother's sharp intelligence, her father's proud bearing, the way the candlelight caught on crystal glasses and silver plate. These people, this world, they'd shaped her, for better or worse. And she was about to leave it all behind. Near midnight, when the party was at its height and the guests had moved to the ballroom for dancing, Adeline slipped away. No one noticed. They were all too caught up in their own enjoyments. She moved quickly through the darkened hallways to her room, changed into her riding habit, grabbed the hidden bag, and crept down the back stairs toward the kitchen. Maria was there, as if waiting. Their eyes met, and for a long moment, neither spoke. Then the older woman pressed a small wrapped bundle into Adeline's hands. "Food for the journey," she whispered. "And this, a leather pouch heavy with coins. My savings. You'll need it." "Maria, I can't." "You can and you will." Maria's eyes were bright with tears. "I've watched you wither here, Nina. Whatever you're running to, it has to be better than what you're running from. Go, be happy. That's all I want for you." Adeline hugged her fiercely, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you. For everything." Then she was out the door, moving through the cold night toward the stables. Duchess was waiting, and Adeline saddled her quickly, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. She was really doing this, really leaving. No going back now. As she rode away from Santa Fe, the lights of the party fading behind her, Adeline felt something crack open in her chest. Fear and exhilaration and grief and joy all mixed together. She was terrified. She was free. She was choosing love over safety, passion over propriety, truth over comfort. And as the old mission ruins appeared in the pre-dawn darkness, as she saw Sahkyo's silhouette waiting for her exactly as promised, she knew with absolute certainty that she'd made the right choice. He came forward as she dismounted, and this time when they came together, it was with the knowledge that this was real, this was forever. This was the beginning of their true story. "You came," he said again, like he still couldn't quite believe it. "I'll always come," she promised. "Wherever you are, that's where I belong." And as dawn broke over the New Mexico mountains, they rode north together, leaving the old world behind and heading toward an uncertain future. But they were together, and that, they both knew, was the only thing that truly mattered. They rode hard for 2 days, putting as much distance between themselves and Santa Fe as possible. Sahkyo led them through trails he knew well, paths that avoided settlements, roads that twisted through canyons and over passes where soldiers wouldn't think to look. They spoke little, saving their breath for the journey, both knowing that discovery would mean disaster. On the second night, they made camp in a box canyon with a small spring. Adeline was exhausted, her body aching from hours in the saddle, but she'd never complained once. Sahkyo watched her unsaddle Duchess with competent efficiency, her movements showing the skills he'd taught her years ago, and felt his chest tighten with pride and love. "You haven't lost your touch," he observed, as she hobbled the mare near good grazing. Adeline smiled, the first real smile since they'd left. "Some things you don't forget, though I'll admit, these past few days have reminded me of muscles I'd forgotten I had." They made a small fire, more for comfort than heat, and shared the food Maria had packed: bread, dried meat, hard cheese. Simple fare, but it tasted like freedom. "Tell me about these 4 years," Adeline said, as they sat side by side, shoulders touching. "What happened to you? Where did you go?" Sahkyo was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames. "After you left, I wandered. Couldn't stay anywhere long. Couldn't settle. I tried to go back to my people, but—" He stopped, the words catching. "But what?" she prompted gently. "So many are gone. Killed by disease, by soldiers, by starvation. The ones who remain are scattered, hiding in the mountains, trying to survive on land that keeps shrinking." His voice was rough with grief. "My sister's children, I found them in a mission, half-starved, forbidden to speak our language. They didn't even recognize me." Adeline's hand found his, squeezed tight. "I'm so sorry. I tried to help. Traded furs and hides for supplies, brought them food when I could, but it felt like trying to bail out a sinking ship with a spoon. Everything was disappearing, the old ways, the stories, the land itself, and I was just watching it die." "Is that why you came to Santa Fe?" she asked softly. "Were you looking for me?" He turned to her, his dark eyes reflecting firelight. "I told myself I was just passing through, that I'd heard there might be work, supplies to trade for, but yes, I think I was looking for you. Even though I knew I shouldn't, even though I'd spent 4 years trying to let you go, I needed to see you one more time, to know you were safe and happy." "I wasn't happy." Adeline leaned her head against his shoulder. "I tried to be. I smiled and danced and let my mother parade me before suitable men, but nothing felt real. It was like I was watching someone else live my life, while the real me was still out there in the desert with you." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the fire crackling softly, the night sounds of the canyon surrounding them. Then Sahkyo spoke again, his voice low and troubled. "Adeline, you need to understand something. The people chasing us, it's not just your parents looking for their wayward daughter. There are men who know my face, who turn me in for the bounty. Soldiers who consider any Apache fair game. We can't stay in New Mexico territory. We need to keep moving west." "Where are we going?" she asked, not afraid, just curious. "California, eventually. There are places there, small communities where people don't ask too many questions, where we might be able to build something." He paused, then added quietly, "It won't be easy. We'll be outsiders everywhere. People will talk, will judge. You'll be seen as damaged goods, and I'll be seen as the savage who stole you. Let them think what they want." Adeline's voice was fierce. "I know the truth. We know the truth. That's all that matters." But even as she said it, doubt flickered in Sahkyo's chest. Was he being selfish, letting her throw away everything for him? She was so brave, so certain, but she was also young, raised in comfort, unaccustomed to the kind of hardship they were facing. What happened when the romance of running away wore off, when reality set in? As if reading his thoughts, Adeline shifted to face him directly. "Stop it," she said firmly. "Stop wondering if I'll regret this. Stop waiting for me to realize I've made a mistake. I spent 4 years living the life everyone said I should want, and I was miserable every single day. This—" she gestured at the canyon, the simple camp, the vast star-strewn sky above them. "This is real. This is true. And I choose it. I choose you. Every day, every moment. I choose you." Sahkyo pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair. "I love you," he whispered. "More than I have words for, in my language or yours." "Ayo anoshni," she replied, the Apache phrase careful but clear on her tongue. "I love you beyond words." He pulled back to stare at her. "You remembered. I remember everything." Her fingers traced the line of his jaw. "Every word you taught me, every story you told, every moment we had together, it's all here." She pressed her hand to her heart. "Where it's been for 4 years." He kissed her then, deep and claiming, and she responded with equal passion. They'd been careful until now, mindful of the pursuit behind them, the need to keep moving. But tonight, in this hidden canyon with the stars as their witnesses, caution gave way to need. They made love on his blanket by the fire, rediscovering each other with hands and mouths and breathless words. It was familiar and new all at once, the same chemistry, the same perfect fit, but deeper now, weighted with everything they'd endured to get back to this moment. And when they finally lay tangled together, sated and peaceful, Adeline felt whole for the first time in 4 years. "We're going to make it," she whispered into the darkness. "We're going to build a life together. I know it." Sahkyo held her tighter, wanting to believe, trying to silence the voice in his head that whispered about all the ways this could go wrong. "Sleep," he murmured. "We have a long ride tomorrow." But sleep was slow to come. He lay awake long after Adeline's breathing had evened out, watching the stars wheel overhead, listening to the night sounds of the canyon, and wondering what dawn would bring. Dawn brought riders. Sahkyo heard them before he saw them, the distant sound of hoofbeats echoing through the canyon. He was on his feet instantly, hand on his rifle, scanning the canyon walls. "Adeline, wake up. Now." His voice was urgent, but controlled. She was alert immediately. 4 years of soft living not enough to erase the survival instincts he'd drilled into her. "How many?" "Can't tell yet, but we need to move." He was already saddling the horses, his movements swift and efficient. They broke camp in minutes, leaving no trace they'd been there. But as they moved to mount, a voice echoed down the canyon. "Adeline Moore, we know you're there. Come out peacefully, and no one needs to get hurt." Adeline's face went white. "That's Captain Bradley." Sahkyo's jaw tightened. Of course, the jilted suitor, eager to prove himself to her father. "How many men does he usually travel with?" "I don't know. He's military. Probably at least 4 or 5. "Can you shoot?" He was already pulling his spare pistol from his saddlebag. "I'm rusty, but yes." She took the weapon, checked it with hands that barely shook. "What's the plan?" "We run. There's a side canyon about half a mile ahead, barely wide enough for a horse. We go there and they can't follow in formation, gives us a better chance." "Miss Moore," Bradley's voice again, closer now. "Your father sent us to bring you home. Don't make this difficult." "Too late for that," Adeline muttered, mounting Duchess. She looked at Sahkyo, and he saw no fear in her eyes, only determination. "Ready when you are." They burst from cover at a gallop, low over their horses' necks. Behind them, shouts erupted, followed by the thunder of pursuit. Sahkyo risked a glance back and counted 5 riders, Bradley and 4 soldiers, all well-armed, all trained. The side canyon appeared ahead, little more than a crack in the rock face. Sahkyo plunged into it without hesitation, trusting his memory, trusting his horse. Behind him, he heard Adeline follow, and then the frustrated shouts of their pursuers as they realized the passage was too narrow for fast pursuit. But it wasn't a dead end. Sahkyo had scouted this area days ago, knowing they might need escape routes. The canyon wound upward, steep and treacherous, finally opening onto a mesa with visibility for miles in every direction. They paused at the top, both horses blowing hard. Below, Bradley and his men were picking their way through the narrow canyon, forced to go single file, their progress slow. "That won't stop them long," Adeline observed, her breathing controlled despite the hard ride. "No, but it gives us options." Sahkyo studied the terrain, calculating. "There's a trading post about 20 miles west, run by a man who doesn't ask questions. We can get supplies there, fresh horses if we need them, but we'll have to move fast." They rode on, pushing their mounts, but not to the point of exhaustion. You couldn't outrun pursuit if you killed your horse. The landscape was harsh and beautiful, all red rock and endless sky, and despite the danger, Sahkyo felt a savage joy. This was his element. This was where he belonged, and Adeline belonged here too. She rode like she was born to it, reading the terrain, anticipating his moves, never slowing them down. The soft society lady was gone. This was the woman he'd first met 4 years ago, fierce and capable and unbreakable. They reached the trading post by mid-afternoon, a rough collection of buildings that looked like they might blow away in a strong wind. The proprietor was a grizzled old mountain man named Caleb, who'd married a Ute woman and lived half in the white world, half in the indigenous one. "Sahkyo," Caleb's weathered face creased in recognition. "Been a while, and you've brought company. We need supplies, and I need to know if there's a patrol nearby." Caleb's eyes flicked to Adeline, taking in her quality clothes, her educated bearing, the way she stood close to Sahkyo. His expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, understanding maybe, or sympathy. "There's talk in the settlements. A girl gone missing from Santa Fe. Rich family, big reward. He paused. They're saying she was taken by an Apache warrior. She wasn't taken, Adeline said firmly. I left willingly. Caleb studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded, as if she'd passed some test. That makes it worse, girl. They can forgive kidnapping. That fits their story about savage Indians. But a white woman choosing one of us? That threatens everything they believe. They'll hunt you harder for that. The words hung heavy in the air. Sahkyo had known this, of course, but hearing it stated so boldly made it real in a new way. We're heading to California, he said. Can you outfit us? Can do, but you've got maybe half a day on your pursuers, and if they're military, they're not going to give up easy. Caleb moved toward his store, gesturing for them to follow. What you need is to disappear completely. Change direction. Throw them off the trail. How? Adeline asked. There's a wagon train forming up near Fort Garland. Missionaries heading to California, some families looking for new starts. If you could attach yourselves to that, blend in with the civilians, might buy you time. He pulled supplies from his shelves, dried goods, ammunition, warm blankets. Of course, they might not take kindly to... He gestured vaguely at Sahkyo and Adeline. Your situation. We'll manage, Sahkyo said grimly. How much do we owe you? Caleb named a fair price, and Sahkyo paid without haggling. As they packed their new supplies, the old trader spoke again, his voice quiet. My wife's people, the Ute. They have a saying. The heart knows no borders. You two, you've got something real. I can see it. But real doesn't mean easy, and it don't mean safe. You're going to face things that'll test everything you are. The question isn't whether you love each other, that's obvious. The question is whether love is enough when the whole world's against you. It will be, Adeline said with absolute certainty. It has to be. Caleb's expression softened. Then I'll tell you something else. About 100 miles northwest, there's a valley my wife's people used to winter in, hidden with good water and game. If you're ever desperate, if you need a place to disappear for a while, head there. No one bothers with it anymore. He scratched directions in the dirt, and Sahkyo memorized them carefully. They left the trading post with full saddlebags and a new destination. Fort Garland was 3 days' hard ride, and they'd have to circle wide to avoid the pursuit. But it was a plan, a hope, a future. As they rode into the fading afternoon, Adeline reached over and caught Sahkyo's hand. No regrets? He asked, needing to hear it. Not a single one. Her smile was fierce and free. This is what being alive feels like. I'd almost forgotten. Behind them, somewhere in the vast landscape, Bradley and his men were still searching. Ahead, the path was uncertain, dangerous, full of obstacles they couldn't yet imagine. But they rode together, hands clasped, hearts aligned, choosing each other with every mile. And for now, that was enough. The next 3 days were a blur of hard riding and cautious rest. They saw the patrol twice, once in the distance, a line of riders silhouetted against the sunset, and once close enough that they had to take cover in a ravine while soldiers passed within shouting distance. Each time Adeline's heart pounded so hard, she thought they must hear it, but Sahkyo's calm steadied her. They reached Fort Garland at dusk on the 3rd day. The wagon train was there, as Caleb had said. About 15 wagons, families and missionaries preparing for the long journey west. The sight of them made Adeline's stomach knot with anxiety. What do we tell them? She asked as they surveyed the camp from a nearby ridge. The truth, mostly. Sahkyo dismounted, his expression thoughtful. You're Adeline Moore, that part's true. I'm your guide and protector, hired by your family to get you safely to California. Your parents are dead. He held up a hand to forestall her protest. As far as these people know, you're a young widow looking for a fresh start. And us? She gestured between them. They'll see how we are together. Newlyweds, then. Married before we left Santa Fe. He looked at her seriously. If that's too much of a lie. It's not a lie. Adeline's voice was firm. Not in any way that matters. The only difference is, we haven't had a ceremony, and I don't need some preacher's words to know I'm yours. Something fierce and possessive flashed in Sahkyo's eyes. Then let's go meet our traveling companions. The wagon train master was a barrel-chested man named Hoskins, who looked them over with skeptical eyes. Awful late in the season to be joining up, he observed, and traveling light. We had difficulties on the journey here, Adeline said, letting her voice shake slightly. Not hard, given her genuine nervousness. Bandits attacked our wagon. We barely escaped with our lives. My husband managed to save what he could, but we lost most of our possessions. It was amazing how easily the lie came, wrapped in enough truth to be believable. The attack had happened, after all, just 4 years ago and under different circumstances. Hoskins's expression softened. "Sorry to hear that, ma'am. These are dangerous times." He looked at Sahkyo. "You Apache?" "Part." Sahkyo's voice was neutral, revealing nothing. "My father was a trader. I know these lands well enough to get us through safely." Hoskins chewed his tobacco thoughtfully. "We've got a missionary family, the Thorntons, who lost their guide to fever last week. They're desperate to reach California before the worst of winter hits the mountains. You willing to lead their wagon in exchange for passage?" "Done," Sahkyo agreed immediately. "Fine. We leave at first light. And one more thing." Hoskins fixed them both with a hard stare. "I run a clean train. No drinking, no fighting, no causing trouble. Everybody pulls their weight. That understood?" "Completely," Adeline assured him. As they walked toward the wagon circle, Adeline let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "That was easier than I expected." "Don't relax yet. These people will be watching us closely. Any mistake, any hint that we're not what we claim to be, and they'll turn us over to the first authority they see." He was right, of course. Over the next few days, as the wagon train prepared to depart, Adeline felt the weight of constant scrutiny. The missionary family, Reverend Thornton, his wife Martha, and their 3 young children, were kind but curious. The other families were cautiously friendly, but she could feel their questions hovering unspoken in the air. Mrs. Thornton was particularly interested in Adeline's story. "Such a tragedy, losing your parents so young," she said one evening as they prepared dinner. "And then to marry so quickly afterward. Your husband seems unusual." "He's strong and capable," Adeline replied carefully. "He's kept me safe when I had no one else. That's all that matters." "Of course." But Martha's eyes were doubtful. "It's just, he's so quiet, so watchful. It makes some of the other women nervous." "He's cautious, because he has to be. This land doesn't forgive mistakes." Adeline met the older woman's gaze steadily. "I trust him with my life. I hope in time others will learn to trust him too." It was a tightrope walk, every interaction. But as the days passed and the wagon train rumbled westward, a strange thing happened. The Thornton children, who'd been frightened of Sahkyo at first, began to warm to him. He showed them how to spot water signs in the landscape, how to read animal tracks, how to whistle using grass blades. And when their youngest, a boy of 5 named Daniel, wandered too far from camp one evening and got lost, it was Sahkyo who found him and carried him back to his panicked parents. After that, attitudes shifted. Not completely. There was still wariness, still underlying prejudice, but enough that people stopped watching them quite so closely. "You're good with them," Adeline observed one night as they lay in their bedroll beneath their wagon. "Children don't see enemies. They just see people." Sahkyo's arm tightened around her. Adults could learn from that. They'd been traveling for 2 weeks when the messenger arrived. He was a cavalry scout, dusty and tired, his horse lathered from hard riding. He rode into camp at midday, heading straight for Hoskins. Sahkyo and Adeline watched from a distance, every muscle tense. "Looking for someone," they heard the scout say, his voice carrying across the camp. "A missing girl from Santa Fe. Adeline Moore, 21 years old, blonde hair, green eyes. Last seen with an Apache man, possibly her kidnapper." Adeline felt the blood drain from her face. Beside her, Sahkyo had gone utterly still, his hand moving almost imperceptibly toward the knife at his belt. Hoskins was shaking his head. "Ain't seen nobody fitting that description. We got mostly families here, couples heading west for a fresh start." The scout pulled out a paper. A wanted poster, Adeline realized with horror. "There's a substantial reward for information. If you see anything, we'll let you know." Hoskins' voice was dismissive. "But like I said, nobody here matches that description. Now, if you'll excuse me, we've got a train to run." The scout looked frustrated but rode off after a few more questions. The moment he was out of sight, Adeline realized she'd been holding her breath. "He didn't give us up," she whispered. "Not yet," Sahkyo replied grimly. "But now everyone knows there's a reward. That changes things." He was right. That evening, Adeline felt the stares returning. the whispered conversations that stopped when she approached. People were putting pieces together. The late arrival, the lack of possessions, Sahkyo's mixed heritage, the way they watched the horizon like they expected pursuit. That night, Reverend Thornton approached their campfire. His expression was troubled but not hostile. "May I speak with you both?" he asked quietly. Sahkyo and Adeline exchanged glances. This was it, the moment of truth. "Of course," Adeline said, gesturing for him to sit. Thornton settled himself, studying them in the firelight. "I'm going to ask you a question, and I want an honest answer. Are you running from something?" The silence stretched. Then Adeline spoke, her voice steady. "Yes. Did this man kidnap you?" "No." Her hand found Sahkyo's. "He saved me. 4 years ago, he saved my life. And recently, when I couldn't bear the life my family wanted to force on me, he saved me again, by letting me choose my own path." Thornton looked between them, and Adeline saw understanding dawn in his eyes. "You love him, more than anything." She didn't look away. "I know what that means. I know what people think, but I also know what's in my heart, and I won't lie about it." The Reverend was quiet for a long moment, then he sighed. "My wife thinks I'm a fool, says I'm risking our safety, our children's safety, by not turning you over. And maybe she's right. But I've watched you these past weeks. I've seen how you are together. And I've seen how he is with my children, gentle, patient, kind." He stood, brushing dust from his pants. "I'm not going to say anything, but others on this train are talking. You need to be careful, and when we reach California, you might want to consider going your separate way from us, for your safety and ours." "Thank you," Sahkyo said quietly, "for your understanding and your discretion." After Thornton left, they sat in silence, the fire crackling softly between them. "We can't stay with the train much longer," Sahkyo said finally. "Too dangerous, for them and for us. Where do we go? Remember what Caleb told us about the hidden valley? Maybe it's time to disappear for a while, let the search die down." He looked at her seriously. "It means winter in the wilderness. Hard living, no luxuries, possibly no contact with civilization for months." "I don't care about luxuries." Adeline squeezed his hand. "I care about being with you. Everything else is just details." They left the wagon train 3 days later, slipping away in the pre-dawn darkness with their horses and supplies. Adeline left a note for the Thorntons, thanking them for their kindness, wishing them well on their journey. And then they turned north, toward the hidden valley, toward a winter alone together, toward an uncertain future that was theirs to build however they chose. The first snow began to fall as they rode, soft flakes that caught in Adeline's hair and melted on her cheeks. She looked over at Sahkyo, and he looked back at her, and despite everything, the danger, the hardship, the unknown ahead, they smiled, because they were free. They were together, and that, they'd learned, was all they truly needed. The hidden valley was everything Caleb had promised, a sheltered basin surrounded by protective peaks, with a clear stream that ran even in winter and stands of pine that provided both shelter and firewood. They arrived as the first serious snows began, and Sahkyo immediately set about building a winter shelter. He found a natural overhang in the rocks, and over the course of 2 weeks, he and Adeline transformed it into a sturdy cabin. They chinked the walls with mud and pine needles, built a stone fireplace that vented properly, stretched hides across the entrance to keep out the worst of the wind. It was rough work, exhausting, and Adeline went to bed each night with blistered hands and aching muscles. She'd never been happier in her life. "You're smiling," Sahkyo observed one evening as they sat by their fire, eating roasted rabbit he'd snared that afternoon. "I'm always smiling around you." "No, this is different. You look," he searched for the word, "content, settled." Adeline considered this. "I think I am. I know that sounds strange. We're living in a cave. We're hiding from the law. Winter is coming, and we don't know how bad it will be. But none of that matters, because I'm exactly where I want to be, with exactly who I want to be with." Sahkyo pulled her close, and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire paint shadows on the stone walls. Outside, snow fell steadily, blanketing the valley in white. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm. Sahkyo hunted and trapped, providing meat and furs. Adeline learned to tan hides properly, to preserve food, to make clothing from leather and sinew. They gathered pine nuts and dried herbs, smoked fish from the stream, prepared for the deep winter they knew was coming. But it wasn't just survival, it was building a life. On cold evenings, Sahkyo taught her more of his language, shared stories of his people, their history, their beliefs. Adeline, in turn, read to him from the one book she'd managed to bring, a collection of poetry that had been her grandmother's. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, learning each other in ways they'd never had time for 4 years ago. And they made love often, with a freedom and intensity that left them both breathless. Here in this hidden place, there were no rules, no judgments, no world to tell them they shouldn't exist together. They could simply be. One evening, as they lay tangled together beneath furs and blankets, Adeline tracing patterns on Sahkyo's chest, she spoke the thought that had been growing in her mind. "I want to marry you properly." He stilled beneath her touch. "Adeline, I know we can't have a legal ceremony. I know no church would do it, no government would recognize it. But we could do it our way, make our own vows, create our own ritual. I just want to stand before this land, before the sky and stars, and claim you as my husband in every way that matters." Sahkyo rolled to face her, his eyes intense in the firelight. "You're sure? Because once we do that, once we make those promises, I'll hold you to them, forever, no matter what comes. I'm counting on it." She cupped his face in her hands. "I love you, Sahkyo. I want the world to know, even if it's just our small world here in this valley, that I chose you, that you chose me, that we belong to each other." He kissed her deeply, and when he pulled back, his eyes were suspiciously bright. "Ayo anoshni, shinijoni, shikis. I love you beyond words, my beautiful one, my wife." They held the ceremony 3 days later, at dawn on the winter solstice, the longest night giving way to light, symbolic and perfect. Sahkyo wore his best clothes, and he'd made Adeline a dress from soft doeskin, decorated with intricate beadwork he'd painstakingly created over weeks. She wore her hair loose, adorned with small white winter berries he'd gathered. There were no witnesses except the land itself, the snow-covered pines, the ice-rimmed stream, the mountains that stood sentinel around them. But it didn't matter. As the sun rose, painting the valley in shades of gold and pink, they stood hand in hand and made their promises. Sahkyo spoke first in Apache, his voice strong and clear. Then he translated, "I take you as my wife. I promise to protect you, to provide for you, to honor you in all things. I promise to stand beside you in joy and hardship, to build a life with you wherever our path leads. You are my heart, my home, my reason for being. All that I am, all that I have, is yours, forever." Adeline's voice shook with emotion as she replied, "I take you as my husband. I promise to stand with you, to trust you, to love you with everything I am. I promise to be your partner in all things, to share in your burdens and your joys. You are my freedom, my truth, my home. All that I am, all that I will ever be, I give to you, forever." They had no rings, so Sahkyo had woven thin strips of leather into bands, and they placed these on each other's fingers with hands that trembled. Then he pulled out a knife and made a small cut on his palm, did the same to hers, and pressed their hands together, blood mixing. "One blood," he said. "One life, Kadniti." "Forever, forever," Adeline echoed. They sealed their vows with a kiss that tasted of salt tears and promises kept. And when they made love that morning, in their small shelter with snow falling gently outside, it was as husband and wife in every way that mattered. Winter deepened. The valley became a world unto itself, isolated and perfect. They saw no one, heard nothing of the outside world. For 3 months they existed in a bubble where only they mattered. Adeline bloomed in ways she'd never imagined. Her body grew stronger, more capable. Her hands, which had once been soft and useless, became competent and sure. She learned to track animals by their signs in the snow, to predict weather by reading the sky, to move through the forest as quietly as Sahkyo himself. But more than physical skills, she discovered a peace she'd never known. No one was telling her who to be, how to act, what to want. She could simply exist, wild and free, and exactly herself. "You're thinking too loud," Sahkyo teased one evening as they sat making repairs to their winter gear. "I'm thinking about how strange life is," Adeline replied. her hands deftly sewing a tear in his hunting shirt. 4 years ago, if someone had told me I'd be happiest living in a cave in the wilderness, I would have thought they were insane. But this, she gestured around their small home, this is everything I never knew I needed. No regrets? He asked as he always did. Only one. She looked up at him seriously. That I didn't choose this 4 years ago. That I wasted all that time being someone I wasn't. You weren't ready 4 years ago. Neither of us were. Sahkyo set aside his work and pulled her into his lap. We had to grow into who we needed to be to make this work. You had to learn that comfort without happiness is just a pretty prison. I had to learn that love isn't weakness. It's the thing that makes survival worth the effort. She kissed him softly. When did you get so wise? I've always been wise. You're just finally listening. She laughed and swatted his shoulder, and he caught her hand, and the repairs were forgotten as he carried her to their bed of furs and blankets and showed her exactly how much he loved her. Late winter brought a thaw, and with it, a visitor. They were both outside, Sahkyo checking his trapline, Adeline gathering firewood, when they heard the sound of a horse approaching. They froze, hands moving automatically to weapons, eyes scanning the tree line. A single rider emerged from the pines, hands raised in peace. It took Adeline a moment to recognize him, Caleb, the trader who'd helped them months ago. "Easy," the old man called. "Just me. Thought I'd check if you two survived the winter." They lowered their weapons but remained cautious as Caleb dismounted. He looked them over with shrewd eyes, taking in their healthy appearance, the well-maintained shelter, the easy way they stood together. "You've done well," he observed. "Better than most would alone up here." "We're not most people," Sahkyo replied. "What brings you here, Caleb?" "News. Thought you'd want to know." The old trader accepted Adeline's offer of coffee, settling near their fire. "The search for you has died down considerably. Captain Bradley gave up months ago. Got recalled to his regiment. Your father mounted a few more expeditions, but winter shut those down. Word is, he's accepted that you're gone. Either dead or so far away, it doesn't matter." Adeline felt a complicated rush of emotions. Relief, sadness, guilt. "And my mother? Can't say for certain. But I heard she told people you died in a bandit attack. Easier than admitting her daughter ran off with—" He glanced at Sahkyo. "Well, with someone she wouldn't approve of. Saves face, you understand." "So we're free?" Adeline asked, hardly daring to believe it. "Free is a relative term," Caleb cautioned. "You're not being actively hunted anymore, but that doesn't mean you can waltz back into Santa Fe and expect a warm welcome. Your face is still known. His heritage will always be a problem. You'd be smart to head to California as planned. Find a place where nobody knows your history." "We will," Sahkyo said, "once the mountain pass is clear. We're in no hurry." Caleb nodded approval. "Smart. Build up your supplies. Take your time. And when you do go—" He pulled out a leather pouch and handed it to Sahkyo. "This might help. Money I owed you from that fur trade last fall. Plus a little extra. Consider it a wedding gift." Adeline's eyes widened. "How did you—" "I've been alive too long not to recognize two people who've made permanent commitments." Caleb's weathered face creased in a smile. "You wear it all over you, both of you. The way you move together, finish each other's sentences, defend each other without thinking. That's not temporary attraction. That's marriage, ceremony or no ceremony." They talked for another hour, Caleb sharing news of the wider world, the continued conflict with various tribes, political upheavals, the endless westward push of settlers. When he finally mounted to leave, he looked at them seriously. "I'm going to tell you what I told you before. The world isn't kind to people like you, but the world isn't fair either, and it sure as hell isn't right most of the time. So you build your own world, you hear me? Find people who see you for who you are, not what you represent, and hold on to each other, because that's all that really matters in the end." After he left, Sahkyo and Adeline stood together, watching his figure disappear into the trees. "California," Adeline said softly. "A new start." "Scared?" Sahkyo asked. She considered the question. A year ago, she would have been terrified of the unknown, of rejection, of the hardship ahead. But now, with this man beside her, she felt only anticipation. "No," she said honestly. "I'm ready. Ready to build our life properly, to find a place where we can plant roots, maybe start a family eventually." She blushed slightly at her own boldness, but continued, "I want everything with you, Sahkyo, the whole life. Children and land and growing old together. All of it." He pulled her close, his voice rough with emotion. "Then that's what we'll have. I promise you, Adeline. I'll build you a life worth living. We'll find our place in this world, and we'll be so happy that all this hardship will seem like nothing." As spring began to touch the valley, they prepared to leave. They packed carefully, taking only what they could carry, but ensuring they had everything necessary for the journey. Sahkyo traded some of their furs with Caleb on another visit, getting supplies and a second horse, a sturdy mare who'd carry their equipment. The day they left, Adeline stood at the entrance to their winter shelter one last time, looking at the place that had been their whole world for months. "Thank you," she whispered to the valley, to the land, to whatever spirits might be listening. "Thank you for giving us sanctuary, for giving us time to become who we needed to be." They rode out as snow began to fall again, one last spring storm painting the world white. And as Adeline looked at the delicate flakes catching in Sahkyo's dark hair, she remembered that night in Santa Fe, when she danced in the snow and looked up to find him watching her. Everything since then had been leading to this moment, riding west together, married, committed, ready to face whatever came. The journey wouldn't be easy, she knew that, but they'd proven they could survive anything as long as they had each other. The journey to California took 6 weeks. They traveled carefully, avoiding settlements where they could, passing through only when necessary for supplies. In the small towns and trading posts they encountered, they introduced themselves as a married couple heading west, leaving out the details that would invite questions. Most people they met were too focused on their own struggles to pay much attention. The frontier was full of people running from something, reinventing themselves, seeking fresh starts. Sahkyo and Adeline were just 2 more faces in that endless tide of migration. But there were moments of ugliness too. The storekeeper who refused to serve Sahkyo, addressing all his comments to Adeline as if her husband didn't exist. The family who pulled their children away when Sahkyo approached, as if he carried some contagion. The men in the saloon who made crude comments about squaw men and the white women who debased themselves with them. Each incident was a wound, and Adeline felt them all. But Sahkyo bore them with quiet dignity, never rising to the bait, never giving anyone an excuse to escalate to violence. "Their ignorance is their problem, not ours," he told her. "We know the truth of what we are. That's all that matters." They reached the California territory in late spring, the landscape exploding with wildflowers and new green growth. They traveled north, through the Central Valley, looking for the right place. Not too remote. They needed access to supplies to trade, but not too populated. They needed privacy, space to build without constant scrutiny. They found it in a small valley about 30 miles from the nearest town. There was a stream with clear water, rich soil, stands of oak and pine, and, crucially, a small cabin that had been abandoned by previous settlers who'd given up and moved on. The cabin was rough, half collapsed in places, but it had good bones, and more importantly, it was theirs. No one around to object, no one to question how a white woman and an Apache man came to be living together as husband and wife. They spent the summer rebuilding. Sahkyo's skills and Adeline's determination combined to create something remarkable. They repaired the cabin, making it weatherproof and sturdy. They cleared land for a garden, and Adeline planted vegetables using seeds they'd bought in town. Sahkyo built a small barn for their horses and began trapping and hunting, establishing trade relationships with the distant town. It was hard work, exhausting work. But every evening, as they sat together watching the sun set over their land, Adeline felt a satisfaction she'd never known in all her years of refined living. "We did this," she said one evening, her head on Sahkyo's shoulder. "Built this. It's ours." "Ours," he agreed. "No one can take it from us." By late summer, they had a functioning homestead. The garden was producing, the cabin was comfortable. Their small herd of animals, they'd traded for chickens and a milk cow, was thriving. They'd made cautious friends with a few neighboring homesteaders, people who were too focused on survival to care much about anyone else's business. And then one morning, Adeline woke up feeling strange. Not sick exactly, just different. She'd missed her monthly courses, but she'd attributed that to the physical demands of homesteading, the stress of their journey. But now, with other signs manifesting, The truth became undeniable. She was pregnant. She sat on the edge of their bed, her hand on her still flat stomach, emotions swirling. Joy, fear, wonder, anxiety. They all crashed over her in waves. A child. They were going to have a child. Adeline? Sahkyo emerged from washing at the basin, his hair wet, his shirt unlaced. Are you all right? You look pale. She looked up at him, this man she loved beyond reason, and the words tumbled out. I'm pregnant. We're going to have a baby. He froze, his expression cycling through shock, disbelief, and then overwhelming joy. Truly? Truly. She laughed, the sound half sob. I'm about 3 months along, I think. We're going to be parents. Sahkyo was across the room in 2 strides, pulling her into his arms, holding her like she was made of glass. A baby, he breathed. Our baby. He pulled back to look at her, his eyes bright. Are you happy? Do you want this? More than anything. Adeline touched his face. I'm terrified and thrilled and completely overwhelmed. But yes, I want this. I want to have your children, to build a family with you, to give our child the love and acceptance we had to fight so hard to find. They held each other for a long time, both overcome with emotion. Then Sahkyo pulled back, his expression growing serious. We need to make sure you have proper care. There must be a midwife in town, someone who can check on you, make sure everything is progressing well. There is. Mrs. Chen, the Chinese woman who runs the general store. I heard she helps with births. Over the following months, Adeline's pregnancy progressed smoothly. Mrs. Chen, who turned out to be warm and capable, with a husband and children of her own, examined her regularly, provided herbs and advice, and never once judged the circumstances of her marriage. Baby is healthy, she pronounced after one examination in Adeline's 7th month. Strong heartbeat, good position, you do well, I think. As Adeline's belly grew round with their child, Sahkyo became almost comically protective. He insisted she rest more, took over the heaviest chores, fretted about her nutrition. It was endearing and occasionally frustrating. I'm pregnant, not dying, she reminded him one day when he'd literally carried her from the garden to the house because she'd been weeding too long. You're carrying the most precious thing in my world, he replied seriously. Forgive me for wanting to take care of you both. How could she argue with that? Winter came again, gentler here in California than in New Mexico. They'd prepared well. The cabin was snug and warm, their stores were full, their animals were sheltered. And on a night in late December, as snow fell softly outside, Adeline went into labor. It was long and hard. First babies usually were, Mrs. Chen had warned them. The midwife arrived in time to help, and Sahkyo stayed throughout, holding Adeline's hand, whispering encouragement in both English and Apache, refusing to leave, despite Mrs. Chen's suggestions that perhaps the father should wait outside. I'm not leaving my wife, he'd said firmly, and that had been that. Just before dawn, as the sky began to lighten, their daughter was born, small and perfect and loud in her protests at this new world. Mrs. Chen cleaned her efficiently, wrapped her in soft cloth and placed her in Adeline's arms. Healthy girl, the midwife pronounced with satisfaction. Good lungs. Adeline looked down at the tiny face, at the dark eyes that seemed to see everything, at the shock of black hair so like her father's, and felt her heart crack open with love so fierce it hurt. She's perfect, she whispered. Sahkyo, look at her. She's perfect. Sahkyo, who'd looked at death without flinching, who'd survived hardships Adeline could barely imagine, was crying openly. He touched one finger to their daughter's tiny hand, and when she gripped it reflexively, he made a sound that was pure wonder. Awi Yaji, he murmured. Little baby. My daughter. They named her Sarah Nijoni, Sarah for Adeline's grandmother, who'd been the one person in her family to show her real love, and Nijoni, meaning beautiful in Apache, for what she represented, the perfect blend of their two worlds. The years that followed were full of the ordinary magic of building a life. Sarah grew into a bright, curious child who spoke both English and Apache, who could track rabbits with her father and tend the garden with her mother, who ran wild through their valley with the fearlessness of a child who knew she was loved. 2 years after Sarah's birth, they had a son, Samuel Hastian, named for Sahkyo's father and given the Apache name meaning man of wisdom. He was quieter than his sister, thoughtful and observant, with his mother's green eyes and his father's patient determination. Their homestead grew and prospered. Sahkyo's reputation as a skilled hunter and tracker spread, and people began coming to him for help, finding lost animals, tracking outlaws, guiding settlers through difficult terrain. Adeline started taking in sewing work, using the refined skills her mother had insisted she learn, and discovered she had a talent for it. Money came in slowly but steadily. They made friends too, cautiously at first, but real ones. The Chen family became close allies. A Swedish family who settled nearby turned into regular visitors. A former army officer who'd married a Lakota woman and knew something of their struggles became a valued friend and advisor. There were still difficulties, of course, still moments when someone's prejudice would show through, still times when they faced rejection or hostility simply for existing as they were. But they'd built a life strong enough to weather those storms. They had each other, their children, their land, their community of chosen family. 5 years after arriving in California, Adeline stood in front of their cabin, expanded now with additional rooms for their growing family and a proper front porch, and marveled at what they'd created. The garden was thriving, heavy with vegetables and herbs. The barn housed not just their horses, but a small herd of cattle and several pigs. Chickens scratched in the yard, and inside the cabin she could hear Sarah trying to teach Samuel one of the songs Sahkyo had taught her, their childish voices mingling in imperfect harmony. "What are you thinking about?" Sahkyo asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "Everything. How far we've come. How different my life is from what I thought it would be." She leaned back against him. "Sometimes I wonder what my parents would think if they could see me now. Would you care if they approved?" Adeline considered this honestly. "No, I used to think I would. But I've built something here that's mine, ours. I've become someone I actually like, someone I'm proud to be. Their approval or disapproval doesn't change that." "Good." He kissed the top of her head. "Because I wouldn't change a single thing about you or our life together. Even the hard parts. Especially the hard parts. They made us who we are." That evening, as they sat together after putting the children to bed, Adeline pulled out a letter she'd been working on, something she'd been writing in bits and pieces for months. "I wrote to my parents," she said quietly. "Not to send, I don't even know if they'd read it, but I needed to say it, to explain." Sahkyo waited, and she read parts of it aloud. "I don't expect you to understand my choices. I'm not even sure I could make you understand if we had 1,000 years to talk about it. But I want you to know that I'm happy. Truly, deeply happy in a way I never was in the life you planned for me. I have a husband who loves me, who sees me as a partner and equal. I have children who are healthy and loved and free to be themselves. I have land and work and purpose. I have a life built on truth and love rather than appearances and expectations. I'm sorry I couldn't be the daughter you wanted, but I'm exactly the woman I needed to become, and I hope someday you can find peace with that." When she finished, Sahkyo took her hand. "Will you send it?" "I don't know. Maybe. Or maybe just writing it was enough." She looked at him seriously. "Do you ever regret it? Tying yourself to me? Taking on all the complications my presence brings?" "Not for a single moment." His voice was firm. "You gave me everything, Adeline. Purpose, home, family, love. You saw me when the world wanted to make me invisible. You chose me when everything said you shouldn't. How could I ever regret that?" She kissed him softly. "We did well, didn't we? Despite everything. We did better than well. We built something impossible." He gestured around their home toward the rooms where their children slept. All of this, exists because we were brave enough to choose each other, because we decided love was worth fighting for." Later that night, lying in their bed with Sahkyo's arm around her, Adeline thought about that young girl who danced in the snow in Santa Fe, desperately trying to feel free for just one moment. That girl who'd looked up and seen the ghost of her past, and in that instant had understood that she couldn't keep living a lie. So much had happened since that night, so much hardship and joy, loss and gain, struggle and triumph, but she'd never once regretted the choice she'd made. Every morning she woke up next to this man, every time she saw her children's faces, every moment of the life they'd built, it all confirmed that following her heart had been the rightest thing she'd ever done. "Ayo anoshni," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you beyond words. Ayo anoshni shinijoni, Sahkyo replied, pulling her closer. I love you beyond words, my beautiful one. And outside their window, snow began to fall, soft and gentle like a blessing, covering their land, their home, their hard-won happiness in a blanket of white. The same snow that had fallen the night they'd found each other again. The same snow that had witnessed their impossible love survive everything the world threw at them. The snow that would fall every winter for the rest of their lives. A reminder of the night everything changed. The night an Apache warrior froze at the sight of a woman dancing, and two broken hearts found their way home to each other. At last. The end. Thank you so much for staying with us until the end of this story. We hope your heart is as full as ours after witnessing the unforgettable journey of Adeline and Sahkyo. If you felt something special, please support our channel by giving us a like, leaving a heartfelt comment, and sharing this video with others who might need a reminder of how powerful love can be. From the bottom of our hearts, your support means the world to us. It keeps us motivated to continue crafting emotional stories of love, redemption, and unexpected twists. Don't forget to subscribe and join our community of story lovers. And before you go, at the end of this video, you'll see a suggestion for another emotional story from our channel. Click and be surprised by a new unforgettable romance waiting just for you. Thank you for being here. The Wild West Whispers team.